So today we're talking about employee file management and how it impacts from a records management standpoint and how it impacts from a custodial standpoint and what responsibilities you have. And we're going to start out just a little bit of level setting and saying, what is an employee file? What are we considering an employee file? There's a lot of different employee files, and they come from different stages throughout an employee's life cycle. So we're talking from pre-employment to, where there are applications and things like that, to performance reviews, to medical and controlled access, very highly regulated access files, from beneficiary to medical information, and also, of course, separation. So when an employee leaves, whether they're retiring or whatever, any documents that are generated from that process become vital records and important to the history of the organization, the records management piece of the organization. And we know that there's more employee files created every day. So in pre-employment, or some people call it an HR onboarding, generates quite a bit of documentation. The application, the offer letter, the responded acceptance letter, any kind of compensation information becomes part of that employee file and almost can be considered like a contract. And we know for a fact that those things really need to be managed on many levels. To performance evaluations, letters of commendation, awards, and disciplinary actions, any of those performance-related things, there's their own set of records and categories that have to be accommodated. In some regions, for example, a disciplinary action or a performance review must be expunged after several years by law. And so as a custodian of those documents, the organization becomes liable for that if that doesn't happen in a timely fashion. Of course, medical documents and controlled access, that's almost a gimme. That's, with the HIPAA compliance and the other compliance rules and regulations in the EU and other parts of the world, that information is extremely private, extremely important to keep locked down and make sure that only certain people have access to it. With that said, that medical information and beneficiary information also becomes something that is needs to be reviewed on a periodic basis, and many places kind of don't have the right beneficiary information, especially if you work somewhere for a long time, or your health information has old addresses on it and things like that. So as a rule, generally speaking, that information becomes what we call a vital record, and that means that it would have a review period applied to it. So maybe we're saying employees must sign off and review these documents every 2 years or whatever, or when they need to. But of course, those documents have to have very, very strict controlled access to those. Okay. Then of course, any separation documents that are generated when an employee leaves, whether it has to do with pensions or whether it's a waiver or something like that that needs to be signed off on, that becomes of course a record and very important to the employee's time with you, and it kind of closes out the package, if you will. And of course, that needs to be managed the same as everything else. And what we're coming up with here and what we're seeing is really that there are multiple groups of folks that require access to this. Of course, the employees themselves, they should have access to their own files. I mean, it's really something that is kind of part of respecting your employee and being transparent throughout their time with you and throughout their tenure, is giving them access to their own files and making sure that they understand the process and making sure that those employees' files are managed correctly and that they understand that. And also, managers need access to their employees' files. Not all of them, by the way, not their health insurance records and not their, some of these things, but anything that may be pertinent to their performance, whether it's their resume, whether it's any type of certification, or any kind of commendations or disciplinary files. You're going to want your managers of those employees to have access to those documents. But generally speaking, only the managers of those employees should have access. So we should lock it down at that level. And of course, the folks in human resources are going to need access to the documents. And we're talking about being able to add new documents to the employee files. We're talking about being able to create the need for new documents to be created, or any type of changing regulation would require modification to the employee file itself. And they would, obviously, the human resources folks are going to need kind of a more feature-rich access and more control of the documents, more kind of back-end or admin access, okay? And then, of course, records managers and legal being kind of the custodians of the entire organization's records, they're going to be obviously defining your retention guidelines or following, guidelines per region where you're doing business. They're also, of course, going to be processing the disposition of those documents or the destruction of those documents, or not, not destruction of the documents. And potentially legal would be performing searches as a response to a case or a subpoena or anything like that. So there would be searches going on throughout the system. So legal would need access at that level. And there are also, of course, putting documents on legal hold because it's based on a case, an active case or something like that. So we'd want to prevent it from being destroyed.
Right. We have a lot of records management people here today, probably, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we noticed that from the attendees list. And that's, of course, kind of our history and our platform is really very centric to that, that custodial responsibility and that records management responsibility. Okay. So we're talking about new techniques, okay, the best practices for the best experience. Why is that? Why does that matter? Why do we need new techniques? We've had HR files for as long as we've had HR, which is as long as we've had people working for other people. Why do we need new techniques? Well, we found that what was happening was there was this great availability and this great movement in HR information systems to the cloud. And that's not just obviously in HR, but really we're seeing a ton of great cloud-based applications, in other words, not on-prem based applications for multiple uses in the HR world, from, onboarding. So when an employee brings in, or you're bringing in a new employee, you might have a system like Taleo or iCIMS or SAP SuccessFactors to collect all that tax information, to collect, from a recruitment standpoint, get resumes and do all that stuff where you have a lot of documents being generated in onboarding. And then you need to, start paying them, hopefully. And you're going to go to a whole different payroll system, ADP or Kronos or something like that, or even, QuickBooks. All those guys have payroll systems as part of it now. Even Bank of America is offering stuff through them now to do payroll. So you're going from, that onboarding solution that's great, that's inexpensive, that just works for onboarding, over to a payroll system. And you need to kind of transfer that information over, or basically connect the systems together. Then you're going to go over to your benefits system, which is going to be through Zenefits or Workday, or a lot of folks use a third-party administrator, called a TPA for benefits, and they may have their own system. And then, of course, on top of that, through your ERP is your organization chart with, signing limits and who's boss and what, who do they report to and what department are they in. That's in a whole different system. And that's what we've seen, is that these systems have become disjointed by the nature of this cloud economy that we're all running to, and it's great. But when it comes to managing documents that are generated from these systems, that's when you need to start thinking about managing them centrally in one place, because once you need to wrap, your records management regulations around them, it's impossible to ask those other systems to do that. In fact, I know from experience that systems like the onboarding systems like Taleo, their service level agreement says that we delete your documents after 2 years, that it's actually your responsibility to bring those documents down and manage them in whatever policies you feel fit. So they're not doing it. They're not keeping those documents online for you, and it's not really to their benefit. They're a single point application. They're not out there to manage these onboarding records. And even if they were, that would be one place to be managed, then the payroll system would be another place, and so on. So you really want to bring these all into one central system. So we did a pre-webinar survey, as I'm sure you know, and we thank you for answering that. It always gives us very insightful stuff, and lets us know what you're concerned with and what we're talking about. And so, great question from there is, how many different HR applications do you use to create and retain personnel files? Only 20% use one single system, and 35% use 4+. How are we going to get all the documents that all those different systems are generating into one spot? Or how does that work? How do you manage them centrally? How can you say, yes, we have a defensible disposition policy where we're retaining documents at the recommended time by region, by type? All those different variables are playing in. I mean, we've worked with companies even that have multiple onboarding systems based on what region or work group they're in. So forgetting just that one process, think about all those different sites that you have and what they're using to bring people in. Okay. And so, we know that this is an issue, and we know that the HRIS modules are disjointed, and it's by design because the people that are making the software are making them to be single point applications. This is just for onboarding. This is just for payroll. And even if the other applications are kind of saying, okay, well, yeah, we have onboarding and payroll, and we have, employer, 360 review or whatever, they're actually a lot of times separate, and you still have to kind of maintain the documents in each separate app, and they're not being maintained for a long term. They're certainly not following our records policy that we like to see. So what, of course, we want to do, and that was kind of, you saw that coming, right, is we want to take all those puzzle pieces and put them together and bring all those different places or all those different systems into one system and make it a simple central repository. And we think that that's extremely important. So when you're looking at these other applications, when you're out there shopping and saying, okay, well, we're going to go with one over the other, one of the things you really need to concentrate on that's so important is make sure that they have modern, simple integrations, and that they're willing to provide you the doc and to work with you and to, make sure that they're going to be able to talk to each other and talk to other systems.
Yeah, real quick. On that previous slide, I saw the word repository. We had a question about that. Can you clear that up for us?
So what a repository is, it's kind of like, a place where everything is going to go into one place, where all the documents are going to go into one kind of holding area, and it doesn't matter where they came from. The process, once they're in the repository, becomes the same. It's a homogeneous way to manage different information and documents. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, as I was saying, we're strategic partners at Feith Systems with all these different companies, SuccessFactors and Taleo and ADP, and all these other guys, and they have great integration points, and they have all these different kind of common methodologies. And when you're dealing with somebody like SAP, or you're dealing with somebody like Salesforce or something like that, and you're running one app, you have to make sure that you guys, as you pick these different apps, kind of have the help or the knowledge to be able to tie them together as necessary. And you may need to work with another vendor even to do that. And hey, little commercial, that's where we can come in too. We can help you kind of vision that and bring it all together from that perspective. But APIs are really super duper important as far as coming up with that.
Right. Yeah. Well, can you? I know I'm gonna get a question on that. So what is an API?
So an API is an application programming interface. It's kind of a very generic term that just means that an application has a way to talk to another application. It doesn't mean that it's modern. It doesn't mean that it's that your app can talk to the other app. It just means, hey, we have APIs. If the APIs can't work together, then they kind of don't. So it's important when you're selecting these guys to get IT involved, or to get people involved that understand how they need to connect together. And as far as what most people are talking about when they're saying APIs is like this idea of a web, an internet-based API, which means that one app can talk to another app, and they don't have to have specifically a vetted connection together, that they're going to talk using kind of exchanging of authentication tokens to go back and forth. Okay. All right. So yeah, integrations, it's a huge part when we're talking about these little point solutions all over the place. Okay, another big part of this thing to consider when we're talking about HR documents or employee files is defining rights across your organization. You're going to have, as I explained before, multiple roles, multiple types of folks that need to be able to see these documents. And not all the documents should be available to all the different people, obviously. So, number one role, the first role is that high-end administration type access, where the HR folks, the HR professionals are going in and they're accessing documents. And not every HR person should be able to see every employee's document type. There may be somebody that just works on benefits or just works on payroll, if you really want to get into granularity. And, of course, your legal department would potentially need access to all those files for case management, things like that. And then, of course, your records managers always need access to be able to manage the records appropriately, as well as your systems admin. So that's one type of role, and that's kind of one type of broader access that you need to establish. The second kind is giving people access based on their location. So you may say that we have an HR person at a specific location, and they would only have access to documents at that location, and that's pretty common, and we see that for some of our implementations as well. The location-based rights can be based on your traditional groups and roles, but the way that we've actually done it in the past is that the location is part of the metadata of the document. So in other words, the data that we apply to the document, hey, this employee is at this location or in this region or this country. And then the HR professional that's going in to access these documents also has a country or a region applied to their username. And by matching those two attributes up, we're able to give dynamic access to the documents. So if the employee moves regions, for example, you simply modify the metadata on their file, and now their new HR representative in that new region would automatically have access to it. Okay, pretty cool way to do that. It's very flexible, and it uses data that you're already maintaining. And that's something you really need to consider: is how can I connect information together to make it almost permissions, extremely strong but also extremely easy to administer because you're already administering the data somewhere else. We also, of course, want to have the manager relationship to make sure that the managers have access to their direct reports files. Once again, not all the files, not their health information necessarily or things like that, but a subset, any certifications that your employee may hold, and the resume, any kind of disciplinary stuff, we're going to give the manager access to it. And once again, that manager relationship can change over time, but by using the attribute assigned to both the employee information and to the manager, we're going to be able to figure out, you should be able to figure out who has access when, and do that based on data, once again, that you're already maintaining. So that's extremely important in a big organization. And then, of course, we're gonna define rights by document type, and once again, that has to do with who can see what when, and we can use. You should be able to use, once again, this attribute-based control to say, okay, this person, this HR representative has these document types that they can see. They're part of the benefits group, or they're part of the payroll group, and therefore they're going to be able to see this subset of document types for the employee. And by doing that in that way, it makes it much more flexible, much easier. You're not assigning explicit rights to individual files. It's extremely complex and hard to do that across a global organization centrally. However, in order to reduce risk and in order to be a good custodian of those records and documents, you need to be able to not only do it, but prove that it is working properly, and that's through your global risk compliance process or practice.
We have a question here from Kathleen.
Go ahead.
How do clients determine what documents should legitimately be in an employee file?
Well, like any other records management application or any other policy, it's set by generally a policy that you have created internally. So there's obviously guidelines and recommendations. However, as I said, if some of our, in our experience, in my experience, we have customers that have employees, HR professionals in different groups. So we have people that are in the benefits group, people that are in the payroll group, people that are in the review group, and they're defining that, they're really kind of compartmentalizing that at that level. Some other companies and organizations aren't that granular. They don't have that many HR people. So there may be maybe 2 or 3 HR people that have access to everything, or maybe just the admin grants temporary access by, sharing documents, things like that, just to people who need them when they need them. Now, another way to handle that, for example, with employees, is your employee themselves may not have access to all their files, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But by giving them access via a central system and also allowing them to request additional documents that they may not have kind of off the bat, you're going to be able to handle that request on a case-by-case basis, and also, once again, audit and make sure that the procedure for that request was followed, and you'll be able to prove that. You need a system that does it. Okay, so going back into this idea of global policies for global countries or companies, one of the things that we know and we've seen in the past, and a big challenge that we had some of our largest customers face, is there are regulations for where documents can be stored, and they are generally by country or certainly by region. So if I have employees working in a certain country, I can only store their health information within the borders of that country. Now, that is an extremely complicated challenge for many of the cloud storage systems that you see. I assure you that Google does not tell you where the documents actually are, Google Docs or Box or anything like that, and you have no control as to where they go. You need to be able to be compliant with the laws of the country that you're doing business in, and if you have if you have employees in those countries, it's a law, and there's a big liability for that. So you need to be able to follow that. So location-based storage and destruction becomes a huge part of HR and something that really needs to be addressed. And that's some of the kind of downfalls of the cloud-based systems that we're seeing. Also, destruction is something to keep in mind, where a location-based destruction algorithm needs to be run. So, for example, documents in France for employees pertaining to their employment cannot be destroyed for 50 years. It's just it's a common thing, and there's actually laws are always changing. I know that in Germany they're revising that privacy law to make it more strict. They had loosened up a little bit, and now they're changing it around and seeing who can see what pertaining to employees' files. So that's very important to keep in mind, that there's always these regulations that are changing. If you're doing business in those countries, it becomes a big deal. Once again, the location pertains or will you need to take that into consideration when you're making a disposition schedule for a document. You need to take in, of course, document type, and you need to take into consideration event dates that are dynamic. So we may say, okay, we're going to destroy these disciplinary files, 10 years after the action was taken. Well, when was the action taken? We have to go into the system and look at that date, or we need to look at the employee separation date and play documents off of that, because we want to destroy them, 25 years after separation. And if your system can't go in and look at another application's data set, at a SAP or at a payroll system and say, okay, the termination date or the separation date for this employee was this day, it's not going to be able to obviously dynamically generate those destruction dates for you. Okay, super important to consider. Another pre-webinar survey answer or questions, do you feel you have a good grasp on records management and retention in your personnel files? 42% of you said no, we do not. Nothing's been destroyed for 50 years. And even 25% said some. Only 33% felt confident that they had a grasp on how they're managing this extremely important repository of files that are generated, probably second to email as far as how many documents are generated for this. So we need to start keeping that in mind, because there's a lot of bad things that can happen. There's a lot of liability. Lawsuits have been brought up against companies and organizations for unlawful or wrongful destruction. In other words, you shouldn't have destroyed that record. You did. There's something going on. There's some policy breach there. It's a non-defensible destruction. Some have to. There's a lot of laws all over the world that say that the documents must be destroyed. If it's paper, it must be shredded. You must have a certificate of destruction otherwise. And it's extremely important and also extremely hard to manage if you're managing it in disparate systems. And then the level of liability is increasing. Individuals, not companies, but individuals are being brought up as criminally liable for leaks in data and breaches in privacy data all over the world. And that's something we hear in the news just about every day. And the finger does eventually point at an individual, not necessarily at the company. Okay, so you have to remove the complication from the records management. It almost has to be automatic. It has to be easy to understand and easy to set up. You have to be able to go in and centrally manage all these different categories and disposition schedules. You need to be able to double check. Hey, make sure this is not involved in a case, that can be destroyed, that we don't have any holds on this before destruction, and that can be either automated or manual. And also, it needs to have some sort of certification, whether it's, of course, the DoD 5015.2, which is probably the #1 certification for all records management systems. Even if you're a commercial company, the 5015.2 certification is something important to look at. It's a very, very stringent test for records management systems that must be adhered to pass. And that kind of plays into fitting into an ISO 27001 or any other GRC or Global Risk Compliance program that you may be implementing. Okay, and of course, e-discovery on employee files, being able to find those files is extremely important. So when looking at different systems to manage employee files, we need to make sure that you can full text search on everything, not just the Born Digital stuff, not just the Word files and the PDFs that have a text layer, but on the scanned files, on anything, emails, of course, email attachments, which is something that's often overlooked but extremely important. We need to be able to full text search those documents and emails and everything coming into the system to be able to find them. Also, of course, being able to apply flexible metadata to those documents. So being able to say, okay, well, this document has, this region applied to it, therefore it has additional metadata that must be entered. All those are very important as well, and that's part of being able to find your documents after the fact. It's inevitable then that some documents will be misfiled. It just happens because we're all human, but going back and being able to find them and reapply the metadata to make them more organized is extremely important, and it matters. Of course, the documents need to be managed. We need to be able to apply legal holds. We also need to be able to redact content on production. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that when I am bringing documents up for a production for a disposition, or I'm sorry, for a discovery. Too many D words today. For a discovery, and they become part of a public record, I need to redact information on those documents that aren't pertinent to the case. So, other employees' personal information, things like that, would need to be redacted off of those documents before you make them available for public record, and that would be anything in discovery. And then, of course, you need to be able to easily export that case in multiple formats when you've collected those documents together. Things to avoid: printing, redacting, and scanning it back into the system. I mean, it's just so cumbersome. Every case would take you, 80 hours to just to produce. Forget finding the documents. Losing stuff, being able to never find it again. I don't know where I put that, because you can't search on it in full text, things like that. And of course, not complying to your file plan, not following your procedure and your policy that your company or your organization has derived, or maybe a governing organization like NARA has derived for HR employee files. So of course, one of our other survey questions: who are your most important customers? And this was no surprise. Your employees. You guys said your employees are your most important customers.
Oh, legal was up there.
Legal's up there, but I mean, number one with a bullet, I would say 70%, 77% is your employees, and we agree, and we think that what's trending is delighting your employees. So your employees are what make your organization hum and what makes it goes, and the more you delight the employees, the more you respect them and give them access and transparency into their records, into their documents, more they understand how you're protecting their privacy, because you have a lot of their information. And the more that they believe that it is safe and that it is protected and there is a policy and procedure behind it, the more you're going to respect them and delight them and make them feel more comfortable. I think it's even better, as I said earlier, than a ping pong table in the break room, is understanding, hey, you're not going to make my healthcare records available to the world by mistake. And so that's super important. It needs to be a high quality touch. In other words, employees interacting with your system and with you every time they talk to you, every time they deal with it, it needs to be something that is high quality. It needs to be something that they feel that they've gained value from. The worst thing in the world is when you call customer support and you feel like, nothing came out of that. I just wasted an hour of my life and I didn't get really good satisfaction. So they need to be able to do a lot of that work themselves, a lot of that self-service stuff and access stuff themselves. And it needs to be, human oriented. It should be intuitive and transparent, that process for that employee. And of course, the UI needs to be kind of very self-evident. It needs to be easily understood. In fact, the minute they log onto the system, they should already understand how to use it. It shouldn't be a mystery. There shouldn't be a bunch of kind of misleading buttons or weird software. It's just got to be very straightforward, very simple. And that's the best software, is the software people use. The worst software is software no one uses. It's pretty straightforward. So it doesn't matter what it does. If nobody uses it, who cares? So now, let's talk about what we offer as far as Feith Systems goes. And of course, we do have what we call an employee file management application. And as we said, employee file management to us starts with delighting the employees. So we think this looks great. In fact, we know it looks great. We've had a lot of feedback, and the customers that are running this just love it. And, it is intuitive. It's mobile friendly, so you can access it on your phone and your tablet. It's internet, browser only. You don't need any downloads. You don't need to do anything, any kind of weird clients or anything like that. And it can be run in multiple languages. That's a big deal, especially when you come to big global companies where I can actually run the system in multiple languages and it's administrable by you. So you have the power to go into this application and add different labels and change the labels around and make them say whatever you want and do that in multiple languages. You'll also see that this is, this would be the employee self-service portal here where they can get to their files. They have the ability here to upload files, so they can go in and upload a file, and when they do that, they pick what document type it is that they're uploading. So right from here, they're going to be able to send HR the documents. And what's great about that is they're kind of self-filing at that point. And with our records management application on top, the document will be automatically categorized into the proper record category.
Okay. I have a question here. What types of files can be uploaded?
So we can upload just about any type of file. We actually restrict the types. A lot of times you don't want people uploading, executables and things like that. But generally speaking, we don't really have a restriction per se from a technology standpoint, but we do from a practice standpoint. We're not going to let you upload stuff that could potentially damage anything. And even then, we protect that execution in our system in the back end. Okay.
Sure.
So you also notice here in this interface, the employee has a button to request access to documents that they may not be able to see today. They may not be able to see now because we don't give default access necessarily to every document in the system, but the employee, in the spirit of transparency, can request access, and that request is managed through HR on a case-by-case basis, as I said. So we also want to give managers access to the files. We want, when the managers log in, they're going to be able to see the My Employees section, and they'll see a listing of all their employees, and they'll be able to see a subset of those employee documents. As I said, we restrict that pretty heavily as to what they can see, but that's governed by the implementation. So the managers come in, they can see their employees, they can see any pertinent information that helps them do their jobs. And once again, they're not having to kind of call HR or anything like that. It's all available to them right away. Okay. Other great part about our system is our built-in key performance indicators. So we can tell you, and we can visually show you any data that we have access to. So we can show you how many uploads you got today, or how many unique employees you have, or how many people have separated in the last year, or how many new documents, or what document types are there, or from a records management standpoint, how many things are coming up eligible for destruction or defining by category. So you can really get a total view of the entire organizational data structure without having to kind of run your own reports. They're all right here. They're all nice and visual. So it's tailored to you, and it makes sense to your organization. So what folks have in the back end is oversight. So this system, the front end, that pretty employee file management portal, which is gorgeous, is back-ended by this equally gorgeous package called Feith Drive. And Feith Drive is where you're going in and managing with a more administrative set of actions that you can perform. And you're also going in to add new documents, reorganize documents. This is where you can change what region an employee is in, other data like that. We can also reflect data from other systems, as I was saying. If you're managing employee information in SAP, when a change is made, that change would be instantly reflected in here right away. And this is where we're also able to build our cases. So I can go in and do our full text search across employee files, and view documents and add them to collections and freeze them and do all that stuff. You can do all that right through this simple to use interface. And we're also able to answer additional file requests. So as I said, employees can request access to files that they may not have by default. And this is where you're answering that and collecting those files together and creating a temporary space for them to view those files and documents. Okay. And then of course, any of our applications and any documents stored in our system allow you to harness the RMA IQ application and really start to get a total handle on every document coming into the system, regardless of its location. You're going to be able to apply the file plan for HR documents, just like you can apply the file plan for anything else. And you're doing that right from here. And you're also able to, as I said, apply these categories automatically to documents based on either their content or their metadata. Okay. So once again, this is a 5015.2 solution. It's got the disposition manager built into it where you're actually able to go in and double check the destruction of documents. So it's a complete solution built on top of all these other great functionalities. And one of the other things that we offer here is fast implementation. So if we're an Amazon Web Services partner, so we can put this up in your cloud or in our cloud, but it's your system. So we implement this as a single tenant system. You're not sharing the same server with a bunch of other folks. It's all yours. And that's how we can get to the granularity of control that we want with the storage devices in different regions of countries. Amazon, the reason, of course, we use them is they're the biggest. They have storage and facilities in certainly on every continent and in a lot of different countries as required, and they're always adding more data centers. Lets us go live extremely fast. The system comes up and is ready to use within days, not weeks or months. And it also allows us to leverage the other cloud-based applications very easily, as opposed to an on-prem system where you're which still works great, and on-prem we're happy to do that as well. But with the Amazon Cloud implementation, the networking and things like that becomes a lot less complicated because we're also in the cloud. And of course, from your employees logging in, we're going to be able to integrate with most of the other single sign-on or what's called an IDP or identity providers that are out there, whether it's straight Active Directory and Kerberos into something like an Okta or a Ping Federate that allow you to pass through the authentication right to us. So you're kind of centrally managing access and to all these different apps through that, and therefore you're not having to create a whole new username and password in our system. It's just utilizing that central system if something using it. If you're not, by the way, that's something else we can talk to you about. Okay. So any other questions, Manny?
Yeah, actually, we have one here. Is there a standard guidance for HR?
So as far as we're concerned, we go with the there's a schedule that was created by the Department of Labor that kind of guides you into few different categories of documents. I think there's about 25 different with retention schedules for each one. And that's one of the things that we provide with the system is that schedule implemented and ready to go. We have other ones, of course, as well, but that nice compartmentalized HR schedule with its own retention schedules that you can apply to different document types is great. It comes out of the box.
Yeah. How do employees get paper files in?
That's a great one because that is a thing. There's still a lot of paper out there. As much as we like to say, hey, it's a web form, or hey, I just filled out, that web form and it went, you still have things like your birth certificate that you need to get in, or, other files like that come in, Social Security cards or whatever it might be. So one of the things that we're implementing, and we have implemented for others, is the ability for a employee to walk up to a scanner, one of your multifunction devices that's just about in everybody's office today. And at this one customer, they use their badge to actually log into the scanner itself. And from that badge, we get their employee number, and then they get an interface to pick the document type that they're scanning out of a list that we provide. And when they scan that document, it automatically goes into their folder, into the appropriate place with the correct document type that they picked off the list. So it's really great because it's just completely self-service. They don't even have to open up a computer to do it. And of course, of course you can use scanners and things like that to get it done. But if you don't have a scanner on your desktop and you just have that multifunction device, it's a really great way to get documents in the system very quickly and very easily.
Yeah. Here's another one. Can I log into this from Salesforce?
Yeah, because we support those different identity providers. Salesforce is one of what they refer to as a data store. It's basically a collection of username and passwords, and so by going through an IDP, you're going to be able to pass that credentialing into our system directly without having to re-log in.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't see any more questions coming in unless you guys hurry up.
Yeah. So yeah, we're not going to belabor it, but basically, if you have any other questions or you want to talk a little bit more about how we can help you with employee file management, or by the way, any other records management that you need, please feel free to contact us. I'm just charlie@feith.com, and pretty easy to remember. And you can always, go to our website, www.feith.com, and check it out. Okay.
Yep. All right. Thank you.